Welcome to The Blast Zone, the podcast where we dig up the bombs that shook Hollywood and try to find out why they went up in flames. This week, you don't know where I've been, Lou. This is Fight Club. Welcome to The Blast Zone.
Welcome to The Blast Zone.
We are not a podcast about bad movies. We are a podcast about movies that did badly.
That's right.
I'm Jon Drake, in-house film critic of my Letterboxd account.
And I'm Ian Dukes. I'm a person with thoughts and feelings, and some of them are about movies.
Movies like Fight Club, which we'll be talking about today. But before we get into that, Ian, how you doing? We're back. We're back.
Here we are.
We're here.
You're there if you're listening to this, and thank you for being there. As to me, I'm not from New York, but I gotta say, hey, I'm walking here. I've been taking walks, getting in a lot of steps. But the biggest thing, the most important thing, because, steps, numbers, that's not real. What's important is that I can now walk briskly uphill indefinitely without slowing down.
Nice.
Maybe I slow down a little bit, but I really feel a lot stronger. That's like the biggest sign, the most encouraging thing, that I can just truck around through the hills around my house and it feels good.
Excellent. Now, did you put these newfound skills to work when you were in Spain?
I did. I had a lovely little trip to Spain where I actually had to hike in the hills, and thankfully I put in some of that work before the trip, basically training for my vacation, which worked out good. I was able to hike the hills of Barcelona.
I'm sorry, what? How did you say it? Could you say it the right way, please?
I speak Latin American Spanish. I don't even pretend to try to speak Castilian style.
Was your tummy full of paella?
It was. I had the paella, I had the tapas, I had the pinchos, I had all of it. It was delicious and amazing.
Yeah. I've been to Spain, but I've been to coastal Spain. It's Malaga is where I visited for a friend's wedding.
Very cool.
Which apparently is like the way in America we think about San Diego or Daytona Beach as these like beachy vacation towns. That's what the UK thinks of Malaga. Like they just go there for their summer vacations.
That's killer. I mean, Barcelona, as I found out, which I didn't know until I went, it's a beach town. It's on the Mediterranean. It's very compatible for someone from Southern California. The weather is the same. It's not unlike a whale's vagina. It's very San Diego-like.
Took me a second to remember that quote. I was very confused for a hot second. But did you have any trouble getting around speaking English, or did you find that most people were able to speak English?
There was a ton of English spoken. I have enough Spanish. Like I would try to start out in Spanish, but then it was clear that I should quickly drop that and just communicate in a language that we all understood better.
Habla un poquito español.
Sí.
I grew up in Queens, so much like LA, there's a lot of Spanish spoken. So I have that baseline of key phrases, but I am taking Duolingo lessons to try to round out my Spanish.
Oh, neat.
But we're going to talk about Fight Club. This is a big episode.
Yeah.
Also one that people are surprised that Fight Club lost money because it is such a kind of monolith in the culture.
Absolutely.
But you know the rules. We can't get into it yet. You got to tell me something else you watched. And you have a month of viewings to choose from. So
yeah, I watched something as timely as I could. Last weekend was Memorial Day weekend, and a movie called Furiosa came out. It hit theaters for that big box office weekend, and it kind of underperformed expectations. So it may very well end up as a bomb, but nevertheless, I was excited about it. So I chromed myself and I got pumped up by rewatching Fury Road. This is my third time watching it. I think 3 times. I really enjoyed it again. The very first time I saw Fury Road, I didn't like it that much, maybe because there was just a lot of hype. But overall, I think the frenetic energy of it overwhelmed me at the time, and I couldn't really appreciate what was going on. This time I was just chill. I sat back and I just recognized the beauty in every shot and the delightful specialness in every character and quirk and interaction that happens in this movie. It's just really beautifully crafted. And I ended up coming away thinking my new theory on it is that it shouldn't be seen as an action movie or even a sci-fi post-apocalyptic thriller. It's a fairy tale fantasy. That's the mood I get from it. Something more akin to like a labyrinth or a legend, or something that's just weird and creepy and has its own very distinct world and personality to it. And if you're open to absorbing it in that spirit or from that angle, I think that's how you can really enjoy what Fury Road is doing.
I think if you try to make sense of the Mad Max timeline and the continuity of it all, it's a little maddening, but just go for the ride, man. It's basically an hour and 40-minute car chase through the desert with pure insanity at every angle. And I was surprised to learn that you did a little auxiliary research on your own, either before or after you watched Fury Road, found out that it probably did lose a little bit of money. I thought it was like a smash hit this whole time.
Surprising.
But no, it cost a fucking ton of money to make, and it was a very troubled production, which I'm sure didn't help the bottom line. So yeah, maybe we'll be able to do a little 2-parter at the end of the year, Furiosa and Fury Road, combine the two. Because Furiosa was another, I think it cost about $170 million, and it's nowhere near that.
Okay.
Whereas Fury Road would cost about 180 million, and it made about 380 million. But there was lots of mitigating factors that made it lose money.
Yeah.
Tragically, there were also some deaths involved with the production, which I'm sure.
Ooh.
Blood, Sweat, and Chrome is the book about the making of Fury Road, which is very interesting.
Oh, cool.
Highly recommend it if you're a fan of the Mad Max movies or just books about filmmaking. The books about the movies that go wrong are always the most exciting to read.
Yeah.
I just picked up The Devil's Candy, which is about the Bonfire of the Vanities adaptation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
De Palma, Bruce Willis from the early 90s. That was apparently a real clusterfuck, so I can't wait to dive into that one.
Yeah.
When you said you watched something timely because of Memorial Day, I thought you were going to come in and swoop my movie out from under me, but you didn't. My movie also had more of a thematic tie to Memorial Day than Furiosa did. I watched Alex Garland's Civil War.
Ooh.
In my book, Garland is that dude, cream of the crop, men notwithstanding. And he was trying something. He was swinging.
He went for it.
He really went for it, and you got to commend that to some degree. But then he went out and he made a much more straightforward movie I thought it was going to scratch my itch for mid-apocalyptic movies. I'm always harping on about how we get too many post-apocalyptic movies. Show me what went wrong, which, by the
That's
way,
your thing.
Makes me very excited for A Quiet Place Day One, because they're going to show the initial invasion.
Yeah, you're the big mid-apocalypse guy.
But Civil War wasn't quite that. We pick up when things are already more or less over. It says Civil War, but it's like they're kind of wrapping up, and it's about who's left at that point. Who's still fighting this fight and why and what's wrong with them. And it's a very tense movie. Your butt cheeks will be firmly clenched the entire time. I struggled with it a little bit. My issue was it's showing you a lot of really dark, depressing, messed up things, but I wasn't sure why. Why are you showing me this? What am I supposed to take away from it? What am I supposed to feel? And then I read some interviews with Alex Garland. I think what I was looking at as a bug, he was looking at as a feature.
Oh.
It's that it doesn't matter why, what they're fighting about. We're not going to give you the details. We'll pepper in little things to give you some context for what's going on. Really, it's just about people and who stands to thrive in this world that he's crafted. Speaking a lot to America now. It's trite, but it does feel like a fragmented country. And he's trying to, I think, make some kind of statement about that. If shit were to really hit the fan to this degree, it wouldn't matter who you voted for. There are going to be groups that are using this as a means to act out their fantasies.
That's interesting. It totally makes sense. It also sounds really challenging to pull off. And a lot of the criticism that I've heard of it was for those same reasons. Like, people understandably frustrated with the state of things were like, this movie didn't do what I wanted a movie to do, which is get angry at the people I'm angry at and put the blame here and do all that kind of stuff. And he's like, that's not what I wanted to do. But if you think he successfully pulled off that third way, not a both sides movie, but a third way movie to go back.
No, not a both sides movie at all. I don't want to make that accusation. Doesn't feel right, but I wouldn't call it a both sides movie, and I wouldn't even say he fully pulls it off.
Okay.
But it's just when I was able to contextualize what he was trying to do, a lot of the movie clicked for me. It's a weird thing to say you enjoyed a movie like Civil War. It's certainly something that will stick with you. But that being said, Kirsten Dunst is great in it. Like, it's really cool to see her starring in movies again. I feel like she's been doing a lot of TV shows or like supporting parts, and she's very much the star of this movie.
Cool.
She gives this kind of like shell-shocked war journalist, war photographer that's been through it all and is very jaded. Wagner Moura, who my Narcos fans will know as Pablo from the first 2 seasons of Narcos.
That's why I recognize his face.
Yeah, he gained a lot of weight to play Pablo, and he's lost it, so he's looking much more spry these days.
Sure.
He's great in it. And our girl, Kaylee Spaney, who you might remember her as Erin McMenamin from Mare of Easttown.
Yeah.
And also the kind of feral sister of the Dakota Johnson character in Bad Times at the El Royale. Go listen to that one.
Oh, yeah. There's this one from the Blast Zone archives. We liked her in that. She was weird as hell.
I like her in everything I've seen. She's got range, let's say, because there's shades of both those characters in her Civil War character. And I think it's a really cool performance from her. We even get to see a little bit of Nick Offerman playing the president.
Oh, you always love a little Offerman.
There's a few mentions to his third term, which can shed some light on maybe what went wrong and what started this conflict. But if nothing else, it's super well acted. I think I want Garland to work off someone else's script next time.
Okay.
I'd like to see what he does with somebody else's script. He's very much on the ball as a director, and I know he started as a writer, so I don't want to shortchange his writing, but maybe he needs another voice in the room with him.
Interesting.
Maybe even co-write a movie, but I just want to hear him, see what he does with someone else's material. But he's on the comeback trail, I would say, because it made some money for him. He needed a hit for sure, because Men was not only almost universally derided, it was a huge financial catastrophe.
Couldn't have cost that much to make, though. It was all in like one little house in a field in England somewhere.
They actually had to pay Rory Kinnear salaries for each character he played.
Oh, so you had a 7X budget for him?
Yeah, so that was tough. Actually, its budget was not disclosed. It was privately financed as far as I could tell. But it only made $10 million, and it didn't cost $10 million. It cost probably like 30, I would guess.
Just marketing it probably probably cost $10 million.
It had quite a marketing campaign. I do remember seeing commercials for it quite often. But Civil War cost 50. You see all that money on the screen. It looks more expensive than that, and it made over 100 million. So I think he's back in the saddle.
All right, I'm going to watch it. I watched the beginning of it, but I do intend to finish it up.
Yeah, and Kirsten Dunst's husband, Jesse Plemons, who I've watched from a young man on Friday Night Lights playing a high schooler.
All the way back.
He's got such a knack for playing insane weirdos, insane murderous weirdos. And not to spoil anything, but he's at the top of his game in this one.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's the reason I want to watch on. It's like, I got to see Jesse.
He's so good in it. He's just magnetic. And all those types of roles that he plays, he's perfect.
Yeah.
He's probably one of our finer working actors today, to be perfectly honest. And he's the kind of guy I could have seen playing the Ed Norton character in Fight Club. Boom. Segue.
Nice. Bringing it around.
Fight Club. Ian, obviously you've heard of Fight Club before today, but what's your relationship with this movie? Because I know lots of men of my generation have a complicated relationship with it.
I've seen it a couple times over the years. I remember the first time being put off by the violence and the sex and honestly just the sort of filth of this movie. But these days, I say this with a lot of things, for better or worse, I'm not so easily shocked. I'm not the fragile snowflake I once was. So I was able to stay focused on the movie and what it's trying to say now. And I think I appreciate it now more than ever. I think I thought it was a good movie and interesting and challenging, but I was a little more turned off and repulsed at the same time, which is probably Fincher's and Palahniuk's intention anyway. But now I've grown up and I'm not so easily disturbed by their antics.
It's 1,000% their intended takeaway. Just the way this movie's lit is repellent. It's an ugly movie.
Yeah.
And David Fincher's a very talented director, and he doesn't make ugly movies by accident. He makes them with great intent. I was reading about they rubbed most of the actors with Vaseline and then sprayed them with water, so they would all just look sweaty and shiny all the time. Like everyone's clothes always has like little sweat stains on it. Everyone in this movie just looks run down, except for, of course, Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt also looks run down, but in a sexy way because he's Brad Pitt.
Right.
This movie is just a wonderful, the Fincher-Palahniuk connection is great. And I was reaching back and going, I'm actually surprised that Fincher didn't adapt other Palahniuk books because it seems to be such a good fit for their combined aesthetic.
Right.
The Palahniuk books are unfilmable for a large part, probably including this one. But yeah, and then I think Fincher also found his way into some other interesting and extreme aesthetics with Zodiac, with Dragon Tattoo, where he went into another weird and creepy world that had a different angle. None of those are as grimy as this one. I think he never gets quite on the same level, but they each do their own weird, dark, twisted thing.
I do agree that Palahniuk and Fincher are a match made in heaven, but as far as I know, the only other Palahniuk book to ever be adapted was Choke. Did you ever see that one or read that one?
I might have read it. I read a handful of them.
Sam Rockwell starred in it, and it was weird. I've never seen this movie. I remember when it came out. I'm a big Rockwell head, so I might have to check it out. But it was directed by Clark Gregg, which I find really interesting. Clark Gregg was the actor who played Agent Coulson in all the Marvel Avengers movies. He was one of the SHIELD guys.
Oh.
You know his face if you saw him, but I was like, the heck? I didn't know he was like a writer-director type dude, but yeah, apparently he is. That makes me kind of want to watch it more to see what he would do with it, because he's got good comedy instincts, but he also seems like a everyman American male type.
Right.
So I'm curious what he would do with what, by all accounts, is a pretty fucked up Palahniuk novel.
I don't think there's any other kind of Palahniuk novel. I had a short Palahniuk phase where first I was utterly repulsed by him, and then I finished one of the books, and then I was like into him, and I read one or two more, and by the end of that, I was again utterly repulsed, and I stopped reading his books. But I think that's his point. Like he did his job. He's a guy who wants to shock, who wants to disgust, who like clearly feels that stuff and wants to rub your face in it and make you think about it.
I'm trying to think if I've read any books of his besides Fight Club. I've read the short story Guts, which I know is considered his grossest work, and I think that's why I read it. It was kind of passed around.
Oh, that's the one that people were like, oh yeah, if you read this, you'll literally throw up.
You might faint. You might, yeah. And it didn't go that far, but it was pretty fucked up. But yeah, you just described like my trajectory with Bret Easton Ellis.
Okay.
Like repulsed and then read a bunch more. And I was like, yep, I don't need to read anymore. I'm still repulsed. But yeah, Fight Club's a weird movie. Probably more than any other movie. I think there's a chasm between the people who love this movie the most and what they think it's about and what the people who made this movie think it's about.
It's full of pitfalls. It's very complex. That's going to be one of the interesting things for us to try to discuss is like what we think it's trying to do, what it's succeeding at doing, what other people think it was trying to do, and what they got out of it.
A lot of the fandom around this movie is these kind of like traditional masculine, no Jerry Seinfeld, but like men should be men again. And and
Right.
consumerism is bad. Like, it's all very surface level kind of philosophy that an impressionable teenager like myself, the first time I saw this, might take to heart. And that's okay. Teenagers are stupid and they should be allowed to make mistakes. But if it's 20 years later and you're still harping on those things, then maybe it's time to grow up a little bit.
Or watch it again, like we like to do, and get new opinions on old movies that we once liked or disliked and now have new perspective on. It's certainly good for that. Like, it's overall, I think neither one of us is going to argue that this is a good movie. It's actually got a really good story. It's really well executed. But at the same time, it's working hard to send you all these messages. And hopefully, if we trust the writers and filmmakers, the messages are more complicated than they might initially seem.
Yeah. And to elaborate on your point that it's a well-made movie, well-constructed, it's compelling, you can't really talk about Fight Club without talking about the twist. And the fact that the movie still works when you know the twist is really a testament to how well-made it is. It is not something that you're like, all right, I saw that once and I don't ever need to watch it again because I know what's up. But like, you certainly watch it differently knowing what's really going on, but it doesn't make it any less interesting or engrossing.
You get a lot more from certain parts of it, like the Marla relationship makes a lot more sense once you know what's really going on, because she is the true sort of audience surrogate in a way, although a really weird one too.
It makes you wonder why the fuck she stayed with him for that long, because the movie seems to take place over like close to a year, I would guess.
Yeah, a lot happens.
And unless these people are living the absolute busiest lives, although I guess the narrator is living two lives.
He gets a lot done, by not sleeping. He's got jobs, he's got projects.
Jobs, so he can buy a huge shitty house. And what neighborhood was it? I wanted to ask you about where this house was built, because it's like a suburb of LA, I believe.
You mean like where they actually
they built the exterior of the house for the movie. It was not like a house that already existed.
Okay.
I don't think houses that look like this are left standing for much longer. But so it was in Wilmington, California.
Okay. I'm not sure if I could place exactly where it is, but it sounds like one of those communities that's like an industrial.
It's in the South Bay and Harbor region of Los. We established during Inherent Vice that you are not a frequenter of the harbor areas of Los Angeles.
South Bay's a bit of a haul for me. So I may be totally wrong about Wilmington, but that aesthetic, I guess it's not uniquely Southern California, but the rotting house surviving alone in an industrialized area, it seems familiar. It works. It feels like a real place.
It felt Rust Belty to me. And I don't know, does the movie ever say where they are? I don't think so.
I think it keeps itself anonymous. Although if you're from LA, you recognize tons of actual landmarks and places, the Bristol Hotel and Clifton's Cafeteria. There's a lot of real life LA landmarks in it you can recognize, but I think they're mostly anonymized enough for it to pass for anywhere USA.
I think filming it mostly at night probably helped it feel less California-ish, because everyone associates sun and beautiful weather with California. But it reminded me of like Cleveland or Buffalo, like one of those cities that was like thriving at some point and just went through a rough patch. And
totally feels like it could be.
But we all know it's coming. Is it time to get to the story of how this movie came to happen? It's a pretty twisty one.
Yeah, let's hear how this thing happened.
There's a lot to it. I'm going to be parched by the end of this. Let me take a sip of my beverage.
Take a sip.
What do you consider the most misunderstood movies of all time? Scarface has got to be up there. Starship Troopers, definitely. But for my money, it's Fight Club. Revered the world over by the traditional masculinity bros, nobody quite knew what to make of Fight Club when it was released. That definitely includes the marketing department at 20th Century Fox, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Based on Chuck Palahniuk's 1996 debut novel of the same name, Fight Club had a rocky road to theaters. David Fincher actually tried to buy the film rights to it himself, but was beaten to the punch by Fox 2000 Pictures, who purchased the rights from Palahniuk for a modest $10,000.
Ow, they punched him right in the ear.
Laura Ziskin, head of Fox 2000, originally wanted Buck Henry to adapt the novel for the screen, as she thought the book had several similarities to 1967's The Graduate, which Henry had adapted. However, burgeoning screenwriter Jim Ewells lobbied hard to get the gig, and was chosen by producers Josh Donen and Ross Bell over Henry. Next up was finding a director. Bell wanted Peter Jackson, but he was making previous episode The Frighteners in New Zealand at the time.
Thanks, mate. Good on you, Pete.
They sent a copy of the book to Bryan Singer, which he didn't read, which is honestly the best case scenario. The producers then met with Danny Boyle, but he passed to pursue another project, which based on the timeline was probably A Life Less Ordinary. The book was also sent to David O. Russell, who said he didn't understand it, which is good because fuck that guy. Next up was Fincher, who was reluctant to work with Fox again after he had an unpleasant experience on his debut film Alien 3. However, they eventually were able to reach a deal, and Fincher was locked in.
Just like the prisoners in Alien 3.
Fincher and Yules worked on the screenplay together for about 6 months, with Fincher even bringing in Cameron Crowe and Seven writer Andrew Kevin Walker to do some punch-ups.
Oh, what's in the script?
Casting was ready to begin, and first up was the role of Tyler Durden, with Russell Crowe being the top choice for Donen and Bell. However, Art Linson, who was brought on later in the project and was considered the senior producer, wanted Brad Pitt. Pitt was coming off the massive failure of Meet Joe Black and needed a hit to prove that everything gonna be Irie.
Everything gonna be Irie.
He signed on for a whopping $17.5 million. Pretty crazy considering the proposed budget at the time was only $23 million. For the narrator role, Matt Damon and Sean Penn were two of the studio's top choices, but Fincher wanted rising star Ed Norton. Fox offered Norton $2.5 million for the role, and the movie had its two leads. They began training together in boxing, taekwondo, grappling, and soap making to prepare for filming. Pitt even opted to have his front teeth chipped to give Tyler a more beaten down appearance, which didn't really work because he still looked like Brad Pitt in 1998. Marla Singer's casting took a bit more work. Janine Garofalo was Fincher's first choice, but she either turned it down because of the sexual content, if you believe Fincher, or was cast and then fired because Norton didn't think she was the right fit, if you believe Garofalo. Fincher then offered it to Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who passed.
She said it wasn't sponge-worthy.
Winona Ryder and Courtney Love were considered, with Love even stating she was cast and then fired after rejecting Brad Pitt's pitch for a movie about Kurt Cobain. The studio pushed for Reese Witherspoon, but Fincher felt she was too young. It was even offered to Sarah Michelle Gellar, who couldn't make it work around her Buffy the Vampire Slayer filming schedule. Fincher had enjoyed Helena Bonham in 1997's The Wings of the Dove, and she joined the cast. The movie had all of its stars in place and was ready to begin filming in July 1998, but the original $23 million budget was a pipe dream at that point. It was increased to $50 million, but even that wasn't nearly enough as the budget was ballooning fast. New Regency, who was financing half the film, threatened to pull their financing if costs weren't brought under control, but softened their stance after seeing the dailies and being impressed with them. When it was all said and done, Fincher shot over 1,500 rolls of film, about 3 times what's typical for a Hollywood production, and had more than 70 sets built. When filming wrapped in December 1998, the budget was about $67 million. Fincher presented a rough cut to studio executives in early 1999, which they predictably hated.
Thanks, I hate it.
The original July 1999 release date was pushed to August and then to October. Marketing the movie was another battle, with the studio wanting Pitt to be the focus of any advertising, which Fincher strongly disagreed with. The studio eventually won the battle, and the marketing was mainly focused on Pitt and the movie's many fight scenes, even buying ad time during World Wrestling Federation broadcasts. Fincher was upset by this, feeling it created the wrong context for the film, which seems correct in hindsight. Fincher and Art Linson have both spoken out about how the marketing for the film likely contributed to its poor performance. When it was released on October 15th, 1999, it was able to secure the top spot at the box office, but was still considered an underperformer, making only $11 million its opening weekend. It would go on to make just $37 million in North America, a massive disappointment, though it fared a little bit better in the rest of the world. It would hit the home media market hard, however, becoming a pop culture phenomenon that spawned comic book sequels, an absolutely god-awful video game, and a generation of men trying and failing to pull off red leather jackets.
Man, that jacket. It still calls to you when you see Pitt in it.
I know. I'm like, maybe it's like for Gen Z, it's the Bane Shearling coat from The Dark Knight Rises, you know?
Okay.
Like,
yeah.
But yeah, it's like the jacket our generation was like, I think I might be able to pull it. No, you can't. You can't do it, man. Just don't even.
The Drive Scorpion jacket.
Yeah. Oh, the Drive Scorpion one's a big one.
But that's more of a costume. Like if you wear that, you're definitely just doing cosplay. But like,
if you wear that, if you show up to the grocery store in the Gosling Scorpion jacket, then you're not a serious person.
That's pure silliness. But yeah, it's interesting you talk about the budget of the movie. Obviously, the Brad Pitt casting threw it into a different realm, but Fincher was super ambitious. You think about it, this movie that's mostly grimy and grounded in these grungy urban settings also has a full-on plane crash scene that's fully realized and realistic looking.
And has zero impact on the plot.
Yeah, they're just like things thrown in there. The ice cave, and then there's all these sort of CGI crawling microscope camera shots that are just, acrobatic and there to wow you with Fincher's visual sense.
Yeah, using such flashy camera tricks and cinematography for such like a grimy, dirty looking movie almost seems to be like I'm hitting the upper limits of my intelligence trying to understand what exactly Fincher was trying to say with that, especially given his genesis from a commercial director and a music video director, where these kind of flashy camera tricks are necessary because you have 10 seconds or sometimes just a couple minutes to really grab somebody's attention. They feel out of place in this movie, but not in a way where it was a bad decision. It's just just, he's clearly trying to make a statement there about his own career. I think he's wrestling with some demons about his own past.
I absolutely agree that those shots are part of the cultural critique that the movie contains. And it is Fincher sort of mocking himself, like, let me use all the crazy visual shit that I learned doing commercials and videos. So I think it's effective that way. It's cool that Fincher is reflecting on his own contribution to the consumerism that a lot of the movie is talking about. But I also think it helps. If the movie was purely rooted in grimy urban spaces and never gave you a breath of fresh air, it would be a lot harder to sit with it for as long as you have to. And for me, those cutaways and those interesting moments help remind you that, oh, you're watching a movie that's trying to entertain you, that's trying to dazzle you a little bit and not just grind you down.
Yeah, and you do need that, not only because the movie itself can be very punishing, but it's also fucking long.
Yeah.
It's a 2.5-hour movie, and it feels long. There are sections of this movie where I do feel like it drags a little bit. If he was just dead set on using static shots and very by-the-book filmmaking techniques, I think it could have gotten old fast.
Yeah, and Fincher is not someone who shies away from making a long movie. We know that.
Fuck no.
But I think some combination of Fincher sensibilities and what I generally think is a good thing, which is faithfulness to the book. This movie feels like a novel where they shot everything. Now, I don't know. I don't think I read the novel. I don't know how much they left out, but it feels like it's a movie that has all the, not just plot points, but just develops whole sections that feel like, okay, that's what you do in a novel where you have a lot of time to spread out and like tell multiple stories in long chapters of a person's life. And this movie feels overstuffed because it's got so many ideas. Think about this. Guy who fakes his way into support groups. That's an idea for a movie. That's plenty of idea for an entire movie, as is guy whose job is investigating defective car crashes and covering them up. That's an idea for a movie in itself. And you could write a full 2-hour movie around that. And those two things are both just parts of the background to set up the main character before the real action kicks off.
Right. I wonder, do you know what minute mark Brad Pitt enters for the first time? And I don't mean the little fucking
the subliminal ones.
Subliminal flashes of him.
It's pretty early if you count his 2-frame entrances, but
it's probably like 40 minutes, right?
He meets him on the plane. Yeah, because he's already gone through his whole support group chapter of his life, right? He's discovered the support groups.
He's met Marla.
Had his support groups ruined, and then his insomnia comes back, and then he's dealing with his job again when he's fully burned out, which causes Tyler to appear. It's
got to, like, yeah, I don't know the exact minute mark, but it's got to be in the 40-minute range. And I find that setup portion of this movie, what am I trying to say here? It's good. Yeah. I'm into it. I'm interested. I find Norton in those scenes pretty likable, if smug, but that's, I don't know if I just assign smugness to Ed Norton and everything, just because he's clearly a smug guy.
It comes across, it's good casting. We're going to have to say it about everybody in here. Great casting across the board. Because that first section he's really put upon, you definitely already are questioning his choices because it's not a given that you have to decide to build your identity around your IKEA furniture. It's like, okay, this guy's fallen for it in a big way and like he's living a miserable life, but he chose it. But Norton works great for that because he's like slightly sympathetic, but also unsympathetic in just the right dose.
Yeah, before we move on to getting into the plot, I threw some pretty big hypotheticals at you with the casting of this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought it would be worthwhile at least to go over it for a couple minutes.
Let's talk about those.
What do you think this movie looks like with 1998 Russell Crowe in it? I think there's a chasm between Russell Crowe and Ed Norton just in their physicality.
Yes.
That would have really made this a much more, just a movie of like stark contrasts. And I think when we were talking about this off mic, you described it as more of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation, which is hilarious because we just talked about, Russell Crowe playing both those characters.
Yeah.
But like, he just came out off of LA Confidential when this movie was being made, where his whole character is a big bruising dude you bring in just to scare the dudes who you bring in to beat up other guys. Like he's the final boss of like goons in LA Confidential. And of course, you know, he develops as like an investigator and that's his character evolves obviously. But he wasn't like a huge star in America at the time. So people knew him as just the big dude that's here to fuck shit up.
Yeah, I think it would have been a bigger contrast. That's why that Jekyll and Hyde thing came to mind, is that the way this pair of Tylers worked out, it's a subtle shift. You can picture Ed Norton being the idealized version of himself and acting out the Tyler that we see Brad Pitt doing throughout the movie. If you picture Ed Norton flipping and turning into Russell Crowe, it's more like a full transformation, right? It has that Mr. Hyde feeling where like he sprouts hair and he gets a thick neck and like he's something else. It's like a dark side rather than like an evolved version, which would be okay too, but it is very different from what we got. And Russell Crowe, he could play sexy, but Brad Pitt's like inherent good looks and sultriness pulls you in, whereas Russell Crowe's default feeling is like intimidation, which kind of pushes you away. So it would be a very different vibe, I think.
Crow is menacing, and I don't think anyone's ever said that about Brad Pitt. Or Crow is at least capable of being menacing in a way that I don't believe Brad Pitt is. And a lot of that is physicality, but a lot of it's just who they are.
Yeah, they're probably not that different if you took the measuring tape to them at that time. Like,
I don't know, it's funny because like in the 90s and early 2000s, Russell Crowe was like the crazy Australian that would headbutt you if you looked at him wrong. And everyone was like, oh, he's bad news. Not like that Brad Pitt. And now there's a lot of news about Brad Pitt that maybe he's not the best. Like, he's not America's sweetheart.
We have to deal with that too. I think he was at the top of his game in this movie. I have a lot to praise about his performance, but I have reservations, as I do with a lot of actors these days, that he may be seriously fucked up, allegedly.
He seems like a real dickhead, allegedly. I
Allegedly.
can't sit here and lie for a large chunk of my life. He was one of my favorite actors. And I think it's because he embodies, and so does Crow to a large extent, like the leading man appearance with a character actor sensibility about how to approach acting. But I've got his ass beat in Jamaican accents. I think we can all agree. But yeah, I find it harder to believe that Russell Crowe is who Ed Norton wants to be than I do for Brad Pitt. So I think the casting makes a lot more sense in that, because there's that whole speech at the end where he spells it out. I'm the version of you wish you were. And I don't see that in Crow necessarily.
No.
But Janine Garofalo, I don't think she's, how do I say this without being disrespectful to Helena Bonham Carter? Because there's like a griminess to her that I don't think Garofalo has.
Yeah. There's a griminess that sticks to Helena Bonham Carter, and it comes from
Tim Burton,
the world of Tim Burton, which is constantly grimy, and she can't wash that off.
I don't think they even knew each other yet.
Oh, really?
At this time. So that's just who she was.
Oh,
like,
so she brought some of that. Maybe we shouldn't blame Burton for all that.
There's a lot to blame Tim Burton for. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, we can spend all day blaming him for shit.
Janine Garofalo, I could see her as a cool character, as a Marla who is a burnout and goes to these support groups as a faker. Like, I can see that part, but as a foil for Brad Pitt's Tyler Durden, who has just so much like sexual energy, and Helena Bonham Carter matches that perfectly. Like, you can see why she works with that Tyler, whereas I'm not sure if that would, like, if you could, as I'm trying to say, I guess I can't see them as a couple, but that's kind of my problem with it.
But they weren't a couple. Ed Norton and Janine Garofalo, you could see, though apparently Ed Norton couldn't. And I think he was, if that's what really happened, I think Helena Bonham Carter is born to play Marla Singer.
It's
pitch perfect.
Jinx.
Yeah, but I think Courtney Love would have been solid too. I think she's an underrated actor who maybe doesn't get cast as much because, you know, every time she gets cast in a movie, she has a story like the one she had about this one.
Okay, yeah.
And like Raylan Givens says, if you meet an asshole in the morning, you just met an asshole. If you meet assholes all day, you're the asshole.
I like that.
There's and let's just call it Julia Louis-Dreyfus, America's sweetheart. This role is not for her.
That would have been weird. It would have been really interesting for her to take a turn and try to inhabit this. I think she's a fine actor. It would have been interesting. But yeah, once you see Helena Bonham Carter in this, you're like, you don't need to look any further. Like,
no,
she's so good. Her energy is just right. And it's so difficult too, because this character is off-putting and intimidating herself. And then just in the moments where you need her to, she shows this humanity that makes you go, oh shit, she's suffering from fucked up Tyler / Ed Norton character. And you feel for her when you need to, right? She's not all dark and scary. And it's just that she doles those out in perfect doses.
Her character should be repellent, but somehow they bring it back to like where you kind of root for her.
Yeah.
So you think about how they meet. She's at a men's testicular cancer support group. You know?
She's a real fuck up. She's fucked just like he is.
It's real shitty. Like, it's a shitty thing to do, to gawk at these guys who are struggling. Was he call her a tourist or like at some point?
Yeah. He accuses her of, I mean, obviously everything he is, he tries to spit it at her. And the way she rebuffs it is amazing. Telling him, I watched you rehearse this and it's not going as well as you planned. Like, it's, so she's so tough and cool. And I think that's part of what it helps is you can imagine her with Brad Pitt Tyler, but the fact that it's a real stretch to imagine her with Ed Norton Tyler is perfect. Like, you're not supposed to be able to, because he can't picture himself with her. That's why he doesn't know that it's him who's actually with her. And I think that really makes that relationship work.
Yeah. We should get into the plot,
yeah.
But also I wanted to say, fuck Matt Damon as the narrator too. I couldn't buy him as like a janitor at a college in 98. I'm not going to buy him as this guy in 99. Like, he shouldn't be in the gutter. Ed Norton, Ed Norton's handsome, but not in like a traditional Hollywood way like Matt Damon is.
Yeah.
You know, like his life would just be easy because he looks like that.
Ed Norton is great. You drag him through the gutter, you smear him in some dirt, you give him a couple black eyes and a bloody mouth, and it's gross, and it's just the right kind of gross. It really works.
But he needs to be a bit of a dweeb to have that dichotomy between himself and the Tyler character. And I think Damon and Pitt are closer than they are apart. You know,
exactly.
They're closer than they are distinct from each other.
Yeah, they're a little too close.
All right. You want to walk through the first act of this movie?
All right, let's jump in. A corporate salaryman who's a mindless slave to middle-class consumerism, played by Edward Norton, has been suffering from terrible insomnia. He finally gets some relief when he stumbles into a support group for men with testicular cancer. Somehow, crying with them lets him sleep. He then becomes obsessed, faking his way into a different support group every night of the week, until he meets a woman named Marla, played by Helena Bonham Carter, who's been doing the same thing. This ruins the effect. With her there, he can't cry, and his insomnia returns. So he confronts her, and they agree to divvy up the groups and avoid each other. But it's no good. He still can't sleep. One night, returning from a business trip, our guy chats with a fascinating fellow named Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt. Then the guy arrives home to find his luggage has been lost and his apartment has blown up in a gas explosion. On a lark, he calls up Tyler. They meet up at a dive bar, where Tyler expounds on his anti-materialist ideas. And after a night of drinking, Tyler asks the guy to punch him. He's never been in a fight, and he wants to know what it feels like. The pair of men proceed to beat each other up in the parking lot, and they thoroughly enjoy the experience.
Quick question. What does Ed Norton's character think his name is? Does he not think he has a name, or is Tyler Durden a made-up name that he's been giving out since he created the character?
That's a good point. Yeah, at his real job at the office, his name can't be Tyler Durden there, can it? No, it must be something real that they just don't want to tell you.
Yeah, he must have made up the name Tyler Durden and just started going by it when this all started going down. But it's always been a question I had. Like, how does he introduce himself?
It's a good point. The movie is careful to deftly step around that and never give him a name, which is a cool device. It makes it fun and interesting in itself, and it obviously helps set up the big twist. The twist at the end. Now, everybody, critics and fans who talk about this movie call Edward Norton's character the narrator, which is fine, but I decided I don't really like it. In writing the synopsis, I tried to substitute protagonist. I think narrator's kind of shortchanging him. He's the center of the story. He's not the guy who's telling you about the story. He's living the story. So for me, protagonist, hero, I don't want to take away his agency. And so
I don't know if heroes were.
Well, I use hero.
The main character for sure. But
yeah, he's the main character. I use hero. I don't tend to assume that it means somebody who does heroic things, but just somebody who's the main character. So yeah, protagonist is the very neutral version of that.
Yeah, hearing your reasoning for it makes total sense. He is not a passive observer of anything in this movie. He's actively partaking in all the shenanigans. Even when he's doing things with Tyler, like you see him participating. He's not like just watching him and being like, no, don't do that. Because then maybe he would be more of a narrator in his own mind.
Yeah.
But no, like he's hopping the fences and pulling the liposuction bags out of the dumpsters himself. Like he's helping, doing his part. So a lot of the first leg of this movie is just Fincher making some comments about culture and masculinity and consumerism and all these kind of things that have become associated with this movie. The lines like the things you own you, and you're not your khakis. And even if we haven't heard those lines yet, that's really the thesis statement we're getting in this first part of the movie.
Yeah, we started to talk about this. There's a big question of whether that was fully in earnest or if it's actually mocking itself. Because in retrospect, from our point of view, these criticisms and these pot shots, they sound like old hacky stand-up comedy at this point, right? He's insulting Starbucks by saying that his boss had his grande latte enema, and like all these sort of like cheap shots that feel like if you're giving the filmmakers a lot of credit now, you're like, oh, I think they knew these were cheap shots. They were doing hacky versions of cultural critique. So it's got that extra layer. But I don't know, it maybe was the coolest cultural critique at the time when you could still go, what's the deal with airline food? And that seemed like a fresh observation.
I like David Fincher as a filmmaker. I'm not sure about him as a person. I just don't know much about him. I'd like to give him the credit that he doesn't like these characters or their ideas very much. And I think most film critics who are trained to look for subtext and symbolism and things like that in movies, the ones who liked it had that charitable reading of it, from what I can gather. And the ones who didn't were looking at the surface level.
Okay.
And I'm not saying you can't dislike this movie while also understanding what it's trying to say, but I think it works much better as a critique of those kind of hacky stand-up bits that are repeated throughout.
As a critique of critiques. Yeah, because it's so on the nose and it literally like it spells them all out for you, as opposed to when the subtext of a movie is the critique, you usually don't say it out loud, right? You let it unfold in the story. So this movie is very preachy in that way. And so you got to think that even though its criticisms are valid, like you shouldn't define yourself by your furniture and your wardrobe wardrobe. It's kind of mocking its own self-seriousness.
It's also a bit of a straw man argument because I don't know anyone and I've never met anyone who is as obsessed with consumerism as the
That's true.
protagonist is. Like,
He's over the top.
He's almost a caricature of what somebody who cares about items would be. And just to give you an idea of like when I say do I call them stupid? So Papa Roach made a song like a couple of years after this movie came out. And I was like 13 when Papa Roach's debut album came out. So I was like the perfect age. Even then I was like, this sounds kind of stupid. But it's called Between Angels and Insects. And like a chunk of the lyrics are just lifted directly from Tyler Durden speeches. They're singing that shit like they believe it 1,000%. And I'm like, these are the people that really bought into these very kind of trite surface level observations.
They became Tyler's space monkeys and they sang about it.
They're ready to be launched in space for the greater good, if only. Yeah. So like when I think of this movie, I always think of that song. And if David Fincher heard it, would he kill himself? I don't know. Probably.
Take it easy now. Let's not go too far. It's just Papa Roach. It's nothing worth getting that worked up over, but
I don't want him to. I'm just saying. I don't think he would like it very much. All right.
I wanted to bring up a little Blast Zone tidbit for fans of the show who have been following along. This is our second movie where a guy answers an incoming call on a payphone, and it sends his life into a tailspin, culminating in huge explosions at the end of the movie.
Can you remind the listeners what the first one was? Because I definitely know. I definitely haven't forgotten.
It's A Miracle Mile.
Right.
Famous payphone scene ends with LA going up in nuclear explosions.
When I said right like that, I was like pretending to be the audience listening because I definitely remembered.
Definitely did. It hit me because you don't make movies with payphones at all, but the idea of someone calling you back on a payphone and picking it up is just like an utterly foreign experience these days.
Just seeing a payphone is pretty...
Yeah, it's weird.
You still see them in some subway stations, I think.
Okay.
Like, I think Grand Central Terminal still has a few, but it's a rare treat, to say the least. A little tidbit for you, Ian. So in the remaining men together scenes, there's a gentleman named Thomas that we meet briefly, who is played by David Andrews. Do you think you might be able to guess where I know him from?
I could guess, but I wouldn't dare to step on this.
He is none other than Harlan County Sheriff Tillman Napier from Justified, a very important recurring character in season 3 of Justified. And that, my friends, is our Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Well, I'll be.
And we actually get like a little bit of a second Justified crossover later on, which we'll talk about when we get there.
Yeah, this is an early movie to start doing crossovers, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Justified debuted in 2010, so 12 years between the two. So he's a much younger man in this. I did not recognize him. I had to
okay.
But when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah. And then the second scene, he had a much bigger role in Justified than he did in this movie. And spoiler alert, there's another crossover, and he has a much bigger scene in this movie than the first crossover did.
Oh, nice.
And then we get the first fight scene towards the end of this section, which is a big deal.
It's as memorable as anything, I think, in movies of that era. That's the thing that really sticks with you. That, and obviously in Act 2 when Fight Club fully forms and Brad Pitt lays down the rules, that sticks with everybody. But this was a scene that was like, oh, something's happening here. I haven't seen this in a movie before. And just the way the dialogue's written, the way the two guys acted out, punching him in the ear and all that. I love it.
Getting punched in the ear hurts so much.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I haven't been punched by Ed Norton in the ear, but I can imagine.
I think even like a small child punching you in the ear is pretty painful. It's just a very sensitive spot. But yeah, like even the way he's like, you punched me in the fucking ear. Like it feels semi-improvised, which, nothing on a Fincher set is improvised. So that's just good acting and good writing. But yeah, it's a very entertaining scene. And this part of the movie feels hopeful in a way that you don't get after this. Like it's pretty much all the honeymoon's about to be over like real soon.
You mean hopeful in terms of the characters discovering something novel?
Yeah. Like maybe these two guys meeting is going to improve their lives somewhat. And then you realize quickly after that, that's not the case at all.
No, but where you start to realize is a good sign for how well you interpreted this movie is because you could really be reveling in the fully fledged Fight Club part, but we'll get to that next about what kind of meaning to take from that.
Yeah. Why a Fight Club? What does that have to do with what we find out later are the characters' ultimate goals?
Yeah.
And I'm still not sure that I know the answer. I don't know if there is a way to know the answer. It might be unknowable, but it certainly is confusing.
Complicated movie. Should we move on to Act 2?
Yeah, let's get into it. There's some fun stuff in Act 2.
All right.
After the parking lot fight, our newly homeless protagonist moves in with Tyler in an abandoned house in an industrial part of town. The duo continues their Saturday night practice of drunken fights outside the dive bar, And soon they start drawing a small crowd of other men eager to join in the experience. The group keeps growing, so they move it down to the bar's basement, lay out some ground rules, and name it Fight Club. Meanwhile, the two guys continue to live together in a decrepit house in blissful self-actualization when trouble strikes. Marla calls to reconnect with her old support group nemesis, but he rejects her. Tyler then swoops in and hooks up with Marla, having her over to the house for repeated bouts of loud, wild sex that annoys our frustrated hero to no end. Amidst their new tension, Tyler teaches his housemate how he makes soap from human fat he steals from a liposuction clinic. Then, in a dramatic moment, Tyler grabs the protagonist's hand and subjects him to an agonizing lye burn, cementing their emotional and physical bond by forming a scar, just like the one on Tyler's own hand.
That's so weird. It's just like his.
Same spot and everything for scar tissue to heal in the exact same way. Maybe it's trying to tell us something.
There's a lot of clues in this act.
In this movie, in general, like once you know the twist, it does beat you over the head with it.
Yeah, but in a satisfying way. It's a movie that really rewards at least that one rewatch, even if you were unsure of you liked what it was trying to say. It's a rich movie. It's full of stuff.
Let's get right into it, because you have a note here where you've laid out your thoughts about what the value of Fight Club is to its members.
Yeah, so it's personally meaningful to me. So I wouldn't suggest that this movie is totally shallow in its interpretation or the way it's depicting these men and what they're exploring through this idea of punch me or let's get in a fake fight. But I do think that I've heard other people talk about the analysis and say, oh, the value of the Fight Club or the meaning of it for these men is to get out their aggression. They're men, they're inherently angry, they're inherently bottled up, and this is the chance for them.
We don't subscribe to this theory.
This is a chance for them to let their anger out. But for me, and I can't speak for everybody, what I think I hear the characters doing, even in that first parking lot fight where it's just Tyler, it's about overcoming fear. It's about being a man comes with the idea that, oh, I might have to face violence in my lifetime. And would I be okay? Would I survive it? What would happen to me if I was punched in the face, And
does embracing it take that uncertainty away from it and make it less of a...
Yeah, finding out whether they can live through that or whether it's something that they have to fear as like a thing that can't be crossed or the destruction of themselves, either physically or egoically. This is real stuff that I think that men have to deal with, even men who aren't indoctrinated in toxic masculinity. It's just a fact of life that you grow up and you think, what if someone punches me in the face? That's a thing what might happen when young men are around each other. And so, yeah, these guys are exploring that. And to me, that's the healthy, interesting part of it, something actually valuable to be thought about that's raised in this section.
Yeah, to me, the purpose of Fight Club for these men and why it attracts them and why it keeps them is, I always go back to a line from Act 1, from that first fight in the parking lot, when Tyler says, how much can you know about yourself? Never been in a fight. These men are trying to go on some kind of journey of self-discovery and they don't know how. And this is presented to them as a way to find out who they are and find out about themselves. And whether or not that's a healthy outlet for it is certainly up for debate. But I think there is something to be said. Not everything the Tyler Durden character says is utter horseshit.
Right.
There are some things he says that do resonate for good reasons. Like when he calls, I guess it would be Gen X for this movie, but the middle children of history. They are in some ways. But yeah, I do think getting out aggression is just there's lots of ways to do that don't require this level of commitment. I think there's something deeper going on, and I think you're on the right track with it.
Yeah, and I think it gets filmed in a way that's certainly grimy, but it's also glorified. It's a lot of sweaty guys with abs, and it looks appealing, it appeals to certain ideals. And that's where you could say, if it's being done thoughtfully, that it's slyly dragging you away from its real message to a false message, which is, oh, all you have to do is start fighting other dudes and become a man, which is its own kind of dangerous message, which is what we don't like to see people take from this movie.
Yeah, and I think an interesting way about you mentioning how the fights are filmed, because I don't know if I'm on the ball with this one, but my interpretation of it is that the fights start off being filmed in a very simple way.
Okay.
And as the group evolves and maybe its mission becomes a bit perverted from its original intent, the fight scenes become flashier, more action movie type stuff. The camera doesn't move at all in that first fight. It's just them from, I don't know, maybe 20 feet away, standing still in a dimly lit parking lot. It is not trying to glorify the violence in that scene. And the punches don't land like movie punches.
Right.
They don't have that. They don't have that strong thump to them. They just sound like two guys who don't know how to throw a punch, throwing punches and landing. But then later on, the violence is very Hollywood. And that's when the group is dipping its toes into terrorism, essentially. They're domestic terrorists by the end of it, for sure. So there's something there. I think Fincher's definitely aware of like kind of the change and does it intentionally.
I totally agree. And he's the kind of director who would think about those things and make those moves intentionally. So I think that's a great observation.
So let's talk about the Marla relationship, because this is when it really turns into a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
If you can call it romance.
One big way you can interpret the movie is like an upside down rom-com, like it's this perverted, twisted rom-com, but it has all these moments of the characters who are perfect for each other, meeting in their place, but rejecting each other at first and then finding their way towards each other. And there's a lot being said about the protagonist and his inability to have a relationship with someone who's in the movie world might be his soulmate that he found. And he can't, in this version, he can't even acknowledge that he's in the same room with her. And that is one of the sort of critiques that's not on the surface. Like you actually have to work that out because you have to first figure out that he's Tyler to really make sense of everything that's going on. But I feel like it makes it some of the more interesting commentary that the movie makes about contemporary men and this particular man's inability to have a real relationship with a woman.
It also just makes me feel for Marla to such a degree, because think about how insane her life must be when she's quote unquote dating this guy. And half the time he's acting like he hasn't seen her in weeks when they were like,
right.
It's got to be maddening. And she sticks around for quite a while.
Yeah. He's like, what are you doing here? Get the fuck out of my house. The morning after they
just had sex.
Bed. Yeah.
Absolutely brutal.
Those things. It's great that they let her act it straight. She plays the straight man, so to speak. Like she plays it real. She drops her guard and she's like, you're fucked up. I don't know what's going on here, but this sucks. And you're like, oh, I feel bad for Marla.
When you're watching it for the first time, unaware of the twist, I don't even remember
it's hard to,
what I thought about this movie the first time I watched it, because I was 12. But you're probably thinking that, oh, Ed Norton's character's got a point. Like they're being rude. They're just making noise all night. He's trying to sleep. He's trying to eat. He's trying to do chores around the house, and they're just fucking all the time and making all this noise.
Yeah.
And she's like hanging out and bothering him, and she's like half naked and just like flirting with him in a weird way. And you're like, man, like, I get it. He's pissed off. He's annoyed. And then you watch it a second time, you're like, he must seem like the biggest asshole.
Yeah, that's really good when you say that. Now that I do bring back one of the things that really bugged me, and it's intentional, is the screaming sex, right? That's someone pointed out when they saw this movie screened for the first time, or maybe in a revival lately. I forgot where I heard this. They're like, Marla's screams during sex are the single loudest thing in the movie. Yeah. They're so obnoxiously loud. And I remember being put off by that. I'm like, what's wrong with these people? This is gross. Like, why are they being like that with their roommate right there? And
the house was empty as far as she knew.
Yeah, she was in the right.
Yeah, this is definitely a movie you watch with the volume button ready at any moment, because well, your neighbors hearing you watch.
If you got neighbors, if you got family.
Yeah. I watched after the kids went to bed, and even then I was nervous, like they were going to wake up to this. I was like, and then we get one of the purely grossest scenes in a mainstream Hollywood movie I can recall. Everyone always talks about Jared Leto getting his face beaten, but I find that scene cathartic. No reason. The stealing the fat from the liposuction clinic scene haunts me.
Yeah.
Especially when one of the bags rips and like it starts leaking everywhere. It's disgusting, man. I know it's supposed to be.
I remember it thoroughly worked on me and grossed me out the first time. And now I'm like, I was
not now. You think it's cool?
Now it's super cool because I eat a high fat diet. I'm like, oh, I could fry that up into something, but I'm kidding.
You should have seen the long blink I did to show Ian visually my displeasure.
No, it's still super gross, but I'm a nerd to it a little bit. But yeah, it's a pure one of those Paul and Nick Fincher moments where they do the Predator handshake and just totally gross out the crowd in unison.
It does appear to be one of the Durden-esque cultural critiques of selling women their fat back to them as like a middle finger. But it's another one of those things that I think falls on the side of this is kind of stupid. Like to vilify these people for getting liposuction in this way doesn't feel right.
When you look at it, it's like, no, Tyler, you're actually being gross. You're not getting over and scoring points with this one. This is just super weird and gross.
Yeah. But I did know a lot of dudes that like wanted to get into soap making after seeing this movie. So.
Oh, shit.
But I alluded to it. There's kind of another justified crossover here. It's the lye burn. And do we want to talk about that scene at all?
It's powerful. I like it. I think that's another one that was like too much for me way back when, but I actually like it. I like Brad Pitt's performance when he's holding his hand down, and it's over the top. It's like everything else. It's like too much. You don't agree with the philosophy or the meaning that the Tyler character is trying to bring his normal counterpart through in the scene, but it's a pretty compelling scene.
Yeah, for a movie that kind of lacks pure action scenes, it's one of the ones that kind of really gets your adrenaline going, and it's super fucked up. it looks painful as hell. But then when Tyler shows his scar conveniently in the same exact location, it does. If you don't know the twist, you do feel like, all right, well, at least he's speaking from experience and he has a little bit of a leg to stand on with his argument. But more than anything, it just reminded me of my boy Limehouse from Justified, who had a similar trick. If you were working for him and you let him down, you had a choice. You could take the lye burn on the same exact spot on your hand, too. Like they did it in the same exact spot. It was actually lye.
Back of the hand.
Yeah. And I know I showed you the scene one time because we were talking about Michael T. Williamson, who plays Limehouse.
Yeah.
Fucking great. But so, yeah, you can take the lye burn on your hand and then the slate is wiped clean. You can carry on working for him and everything's cool. Or you don't have to get the burn, but that means the next time you screw up, you're donezo. And I don't mean like you're kicked out of the clubhouse. I mean like bullet to the back of the head if you're lucky.
Yeah. Probably something more painful.
Maybe fed to the pigs. But I'll put the YouTube for that scene in the show notes if you guys want to check it out, because I'm trying to convert all of our listeners into Justified watchers. And I think that scene would go a long way. It's just expertly acted. And Michael T. Williamson, just fucking powerhouse. I was a little disappointed. His character never really lived up to the menace that first scene laid down.
Oh, okay.
They kind of softened up his character because you can't stay that scary forever.
It's a good scene. It's the only part I ever saw of him in that show. It ends with a good twist. You see the scars on the back of his other henchman's hand, who's obviously been through the ringer and was strong enough to deal with the pain.
Errol, good old Errol. So that was my little double Justified crossover.
Justified crossover of the week.
Yeah. Back to what we didn't know until recently all clicked is that both Tyler Durden and Michael T's Limehouse character were part of the Bene Gesserit. And they were actually applying the Gom Jabbar to their young ones and testing to see whether they were human.
I thought you were going to say that Limehouse and Tyler Durden were actually the same person. That would be a real twist.
Tyler Durden is like a free-floating split personality that can latch on to anybody.
All right, let's walk through the third act. You ready?
Yeah, here we go. Under Tyler's direction, the Fight Club grows, and it morphs into something bigger than a men's support group. Applicants are hazed and initiated into a cadre of operatives who live together in the house and undertake missions of vandalism and mischief under the moniker Project Mayhem. The protagonist begins to feel further alienated from Tyler, and he takes out his frustrations by savagely beating one recruit. Tyler continues to challenge the hero's relationship to life, urging him to let go and hit bottom, and he goads the protagonist into crashing the car they're in, which they both survive. When the hero's friend Bob is killed during one of the missions, he decides to get to the bottom of the secretive Project Mayhem and put a stop to it. But as he dives deeper, he discovers it's way bigger than he knew. And then he unearths the most shocking secret of all. The protagonist himself is Tyler Durden. All this time, it's been his own alter ego leading the mayhem without him realizing. The hero tries to turn himself into the police, but the cops turn out to be part of the club, and he's forced to make a desperate escape. Finally, he confronts his alternate self, Tyler, in a building in the financial district. Project Mayhem's final plan is to blow up a group of buildings containing the banks that hold everyone's credit record. The hero figuratively and psychologically kills Tyler by firing a pistol into his own mouth, which manages to tear open his cheek but leaves him alive. Then the hero and Marla watch as the explosives go off and begin to bring down the buildings around them. Your favorite movie soundtrack, Stand By. Is this the first time it got used in a movie?
I believe this was the genesis of like, this guy's crazy. We're going to play that Pixie song.
Yeah.
But I don't always hate it. Don't get me wrong. Like The Leftovers uses it extremely well, but they just use like a piano version of it.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't recognize, and you had to point it out to me. I didn't know. The song is called Where Is My Mind?
Where is my mind? Yes. Great song. Shout out to Pixies. I have their album hanging right over my head right there.
Always with us.
Not the album that the song is on. That was Surfer Rosa, I think it was on. This is Doolittle. Okay. But yeah, great album. Both great albums.
Good choice.
It's a banger of a fucking end credits song while buildings collapse. Like I think it is one of the best score to scene examples I can think of. Just like a song that fits perfectly.
Yeah, it's nice. I like that it's not over the top emotionally. I mean, it has energy and power, but it doesn't try to, match the wildness of some of the film's moments or characters with a screaming metal performance or whatever, like something super over the top. It just both has a great rock edge to it, but a vulnerability and a weirdness. And it's good. I guess I'm describing the Pixies.
You described the Pixies. Yeah. But also the soundtrack of the movie was done by the Dust Brothers, I believe.
That's right.
Like an electro rock duo. Fincher wanted Radiohead. This was way before Johnny Greenwood was, in his bag, making more money as a film scorer than a musician probably, or a touring musician anyway. But they turned it down because they had just made OK Computer and were exhausted, needed a break.
Oh.
But I wonder what that would have been like. But the score, the score doesn't stick with you of this movie. I feel like it's very much a accent piece. It's not in the forefront really.
It's a little forgettable. It's funny that it seems generic. The Dust Brothers produced Paul's Boutique. Like
Really?
all those insane tracks on Paul's Boutique is Dust Brothers. So they're like legendary. And at this point, I guess this was 10 years later or something, they're just maybe not as vital.
Chill.
They were just making kind of replacement level sort of movie music. It's fine. The music in it works. It does the job.
I get them confused with the Chemical Brothers a lot.
I do too. I had to actually Google it to make sure I was right about the Paul's Boutique. But
yeah, another one of those block rockin' beats.
That's Chemical Brothers.
That's Chemical Brothers. I'm fairly certain. If it's not, then there's a third group I'm getting confused with, and that's too much.
Just some other brothers. Yeah.
The Brothers. It's Hulk Hogan's electro rock duo, the Brothers. Jeez, we've been recording forever. I'm getting loopy. So I do feel like the movie stagnates a bit in the Project Mayhem section of the movie.
I know what you mean.
It's like, yeah, you're yelling at the guy on your porch. You're doing a whole fraternity hazing thing. Then 20 minutes later, you're still yelling at guys on your porch.
That's true.
The movie is on a high-speed rail to Fight Club, but then I feel like it slows down after that, and it becomes a bit repetitive, a bit mundane, which is interesting when you consider that like the things they're doing are way more interesting on it, like from a moviegoer's perspective. Like they're not just beating each other up in a basement anymore. They're blowing up buildings, and they're out like kidnapping police commissioners and threatening to cut their balls off. Like it's all very quote unquote exciting, but it just feels like there's not a lot of forward momentum for a big chunk of this section.
Yeah, there's both a lot of plot in this section, some of which I think you and I would both argue could have been cut. Like they could have just, the resolution of the protagonist's job situation and how he ends up being independent. Did we need to know that? No, he could have just abandoned his job. There's a bunch of stuff that goes on, some of it which feels like maybe could have trimmed to accelerate the pace. Some of it, which is, like you're saying, is actually a ramping up of the action as Project Mayhem kicks into gear. But during that, the emotional story of the character is that he's becoming more alienated from Tyler, which leads to the interesting breakdown when he starts to question things. And that's where it gets interesting again. But in between, it feels static. And it feels, as we discussed off air, it feels like that emotional storyline in that third act is supposed to culminate in the crashing of the Lincoln Town car, where, Tyler's telling the protagonist to let go and hit bottom, but it doesn't quite line up. I think that's the reason why it feels like we're just spinning our wheels, no pun intended, and stayed in place, because that moment doesn't feel like the emotional resolution of the narrator's problem in that whole part of the movie.
Right. It's not cathartic for the narrator, and therefore it's not cathartic for us. Like it doesn't actually solve anything. He's saying one thing and Tyler is addressing a whole other problem that maybe he thinks is the root cause of what the narrator protagonist is feeling. But I don't know. It rings a little hollow for me.
Yeah, it's hard to connect. The narrator is having real issues. Like he feels disconnected of what Tyler has created and what Project Mayhem is doing, which it's an actual problem of him being disconnected with himself. And so I guess Tyler's saying, let go, hit bottom, you'll get what's going on because that's what you really care about. It's where all your nights and weekends are going. But it doesn't click for us. And it's maybe the weakest part of the movie and the part where you start to feel fatigue because the movie's gone on for a while at this point.
Yeah. What is the third act resolution we're looking for? It's not clear. There's not really like something we're building towards, or at least maybe the characters are, but we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
So it does feel kind of meandering.
And in the middle of that is where he beats up Jared Leto, right?
Yeah. I watched that scene a couple times. No reason.
He morbed all over Jared Leto. And that's, to me, was an interesting thing what happens there. Because after he beats his face in, the protagonist says, I don't know if someone asks him or he just says, I felt like destroying something beautiful.
I think Tyler says, and I quote, when did you go all psycho boy? Or something like that.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm like, that's actually a helpful key to me understanding the movie. I felt like destroying something beautiful because all this surface level of like consumerism is bad, leave materialism behind. This is like a hint that actually it's not that clever. It's just a guy that wants to destroy, right? If that's what the narrator's thinking, then that's what Tyler's thinking too. And so it undermines all his carefully crafted socio-political rhetoric. And it's just, no, actually, you're just trying to tear shit down. And as we'll get to in the end, I think that's what happens. We have to talk about how the movie ends, but we're not quite there.
I think the movie is starting to work to undercut Tyler's kind of diatribes in this section. And one of the main things I noticed on my rewatch was that I don't know if this is just after the protagonist realizes that he is Tyler and Tyler is him, but like Tyler's wardrobe gets very expensive towards the end of this movie.
Okay.
He's not wearing like kind of grimy t-shirts anymore. He's in that scene where he's talking to him in the hotel. He's wearing like these very fine Italian leather loafers, which look certainly well maintained. Like leather shoes don't just stay nice if you don't take care of them. If they were like beat up and cracked, like he thrifted them and just didn't take care of them at all, that'd be one thing. But no, like they look freshly shined and polished and kept in good shape, which seems very antithetical to Tyler's message. And I think his wardrobe does get progressively more like flamboyant and extravagant as the movie goes on. And I think that's a sign that he doesn't actually believe what he's saying.
Yeah. Or he's corrupted. He's gone back on his own values, or stated values at least.
Also, I find the idea that like you could blow up a couple buildings and destroy the credit record very 1998, 1999,
That's true.
because it was like, it's in the cloud now.
It's all paper receipts at that point. But yeah, despite all this criticism that we have for the third act, I feel like once the twist reveal happens, that's still really fun.
Yeah, it picks up a lot of steam right after that.
The cross-country tour, he's going around, he's meeting people, different people start calling him Sir, start calling him Tyler. And it's fun. Even though you knew it was coming, those are still exciting and fun to watch.
Can we rewind for a second to how he finds out he's Tyler? Because we both wanted to talk about this character. I think he's just bartender, right? He hasn't got a name, but he's wearing a full-on Halo brace.
Yeah,
and looks beat to shit.
He's the most fucked up dude of all. Like, you consistently see guys with Band-Aids on their face and black eyes, and this guy has a halo screwed into his skull. And not only that, but like his cheek is totally puckered. Like, he is fucked up in a bad way.
Yeah. Does that mean, is his neck broken, or is he just, I don't know, like that usually you only get that for a broken neck, right?
I think so, yeah. It's usually some kind of spinal injury that needs to be totally immobilized. And he's the one who says, you, sir, you're Tyler, sir. You're the one who gave me this. And he has a matching Lye scar.
Yep.
I love that guy.
That is none other than Michael Seamus Wiles, a very accomplished character actor in his own right,
nice.
Who I think I remember seeing him on a TV show.
Really?
Let's see which one it might have been. Oh, yeah, that's right. He played Winston Baines on Justified. And that's a second or third, maybe, Justified crossover of the week.
Justified crossover of the week.
Oh, yeah.
He uttered the immortal line, you tased me in the nuts, which is just classic stuff.
He's got to get some good little bit parts.
Yeah, he nails them every time. He looks super old and Justified. I did not recognize him as the same guy.
Oh, okay.
Surprised when I saw him. But he has a much bigger part in this movie than the first guy we shouted out. David Andrews, yeah. He was just a guy in the background of the support meetings. But this guy's pretty important to the movie. He's how the protagonist puts it all together.
Yeah, he's the guy who really tells him he's Tyler.
Nobody else will tell him because he told them not to already. But I love the scene with the cops when they're all like trying to cut his balls off. And
yeah, you talk about the scenes that raise your adrenaline. That's one of them, when they're holding him down and like refuting all his arguments of why they should let them go.
Like, oh, you said you'd say that. You said that too.
You definitely said that.
But then when he does grab one of their guns, I think Ed Norton says the dorkiest line I've ever heard, and also says it in a really dorky way. And I think it's like perfect to kind of undercut how he really isn't like Tyler in any meaningful way, when he's like, anyone takes one step, they're getting a lead salad.
Yes. Lead salad is a great line. It's funny how it's great there, because you do see that huge gap between what Tyler seems to be able to do and what the narrator is able to conjure in his regular life. But they don't make that much of that. Like, he's never that goofy the rest of the movie, but it's really funny right there.
Yeah. Gen Z would say that Ed Norton in this movie has got no Riz, whereas Tyler is just dripping Riz.
He's all Riz, yeah.
He's all Riz all the time. No, yeah, I thought that was like, aside from being like a fun scene, it also advanced like kind of our understanding of the characters and their place in this world. And I do love that one cop isn't in on it, and he's that same detective the whole time.
Yeah.
Figures out that Tyler blew up his own apartment. Underrated character. I really like the detective in this movie.
It's kind of droll and it's funny. It's a good character. Should we skip ahead to the ending?
Yeah, I guess, right?
I mean, it's not that much of a skip. There's his meeting with Marla, but that sort of ties into, there's a sort of last ditch attempt to send her out of town, which fails, and she ends up
Well, it works. She gets on the bus, but you immediately see a bunch of dudes stand up on the bus and accost her.
It's everywhere.
Put the pieces together.
Yeah, Project Mayhem has taken over.
I did really love her acting in the scene at Clifton's cafeteria, where she's just so exasperated with all like this weirdness, and somebody's like, oh, it's free of charge. She's like, why is it free of charge? She's just very annoyed at that point with all this kind of mystery.
Yeah.
And then when she also realizes she could get like a bunch of free food out of it and just orders like half the menu.
And then he's like, bring the clean food only. And I would recommend not getting the clam chowder, sir.
It comes in one big pot. You can't
undo that crime.
You're not seasoning every bowl. That's just not efficient.
But it's great. That to me is like the capper, because that's a classic rom-com scene, except The hero usually stops his true love from leaving town on a bus or an airplane running through the airport. Like, this is the version of that, except he grabs her and forces her to get on a bus out of town.
And I also want to shout out Halt McCallany, who's like the second in command if you consider Tyler and Ed Norton one person, or the third in command if you consider them two people, henchman. And Fincher would go on to, of course, cast him in Mindhunter, which is just a fabulous show on Netflix.
Right.
As a senior FBI agent and one of the original serial killer profilers. He's just great. He was in a FX show called Lights Out about like an old boxer trying to get back into it because he needs money, but he's got a little CTE creeping up on him. Really good show. Only lasted one season as far as I know. But yeah, he's just a guy like when you see in a thing, you're like, oh, he's going to be at the very least like solid.
He's good, and he's in the background in a lot of this, but he's a good actor, and there are good actors in a lot of those smaller roles that really help them shine.
Yeah, I like the initial kind of recruit, like the first guy who stands on their door. I like that actor.
He hardly says anything, but he's compelling.
He's got a good look. Is he in the car when they crash it, or did they make those guys get out at some point, don't they?
No, I think the two of them are still in the back seat.
Do they die? They make them buckle up at least.
I see Tyler buckling up. Actually, I'm not sure if they show you what happened to them.
I can't remember if they pop up in later scenes, but that's pretty fucked up. Can you imagine what they were thinking watching Ed Norton like argue with himself?
Yeah, they were confused. That's played well. It's not a bad scene. We were just disappointed because we couldn't make sense of what it was trying to do story-wise.
What it means thematically is unclear to me still, and what it was trying to accomplish. But like the scene itself is well made. David Fincher's, he's a good filmmaker. I'm sorry if that's controversial.
Pretty good director.
He knows how to make a movie.
So I tipped you off. I put my fan theory in the notes here. Do you agree with me? So the gist of it, to cut to the chase, is that the narrator and Marla don't make it out of this, even though we see them holding hands and it's like a romantic, everything's over, we're safe kind of moment is the last thing on screen, but I don't think that's what happens.
That's not the building that van is in. So you see Tyler plug the bomb back in. They actually do show that. It's very quick. But when they're fighting in the van and he disarms the bomb, Tyler then kicks him out of the back door and puts the wire back in. But then they change buildings. They're not in the building that has a bomb. There's no bomb in that building.
Oh, really?
But I would be willing to go along with you that, you know, we've seen, unfortunately, buildings fall and that they can injure people in the surrounding areas. But if we think Chuck Palahniuk has the final say, he wrote 2 sequels as comic books. And if we take those as canon, they survive and have a baby.
Oh, okay. Well, there's that. I like my version where they are in the same building. So to explain to anybody that's not following along with you and I, there's this meeting in the parking garage. The narrator disarms the bomb. Then they have a fight. And then they're later shown upstairs in the building watching the stuff go off. And you go, oh, he disarmed the bomb, so it's not going to go off. But he definitely restarted that bomb. And I thought they were in that building. So I thought that bomb was just 2 minutes behind. So I'm like, oh, that's just enough time for this scene to go on, them to watch the other bombs, and then to be taken out just after we go to black. But you're saying,
well, here's my qualm. I think Tyler mentions I've got us a great spot in like another building, and then like it cuts to them in that room. But also my qualm with this theory is that Tyler doesn't seem particularly excited about the idea of dying when he sees the protagonist put the gun to his head. He seems like he's trying to talk him out of killing him.
That's true.
Whereas the bomb going off would kill both of them, obviously.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. The movie to me is very coherent if in my version where Marla and the narrator blow up just after it cuts to black, because it's the culmination of the whole time this character has been suicidal from the start. He was fantasizing about his death in a plane crash in the first act of the movie. And it would make the point that he really represented nothing but death and destruction and the sort of the end of everything good, including finding his true love. But maybe it's a happy ending. At least, like you said, I'm not sure what Fincher thought would happen after this movie ended, but if Palahniuk thought that the narrator was alive and go on to do other stuff, then we got to give him that.
Yeah, I don't know how happy the ending is that Palahniuk gives them, but they're definitely alive. But they're relatively recent. I think Fight Club 2 was like a graphic novel that came out in 2016 maybe, and then the third one was 2019. I don't know if I'll ever check them out, but I briefly read the synopsis of them. They sound weird, of course.
But yeah, he's clinging to life. I do think that the narrator putting the gun in his own mouth and firing it and showing that on screen was something I had not seen before, and certainly not in a way
it always cuts away.
The character survives it, like seeing the glow in his mouth and then hearing the way he's trying to speak afterwards. It's kind of insane in a good way. Like that is some gonzo filmmaking and really well done.
Can you find some gauze? Yeah, I think this might be Fincher's most violent movie, even more so than Seven. Like Seven's not really a violent movie for all that people talk about it. You don't see very much in that film at all. You hear about a lot of horrifying things that have happened, but Fight Club's all about showing you the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Some horrible stuff happens in Dragon Tattoo, as I recall.
You know what? I never saw that movie. Still
Oh
haven't
my
seen it.
God, dude.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Movie night. We got to do that one.
All right. Made money, so we can't cover it, but I'll watch it anyway.
Okay.
So speaking of David Fincher, do you want to hear? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on him. We just talked about him with Zodiac.
Sure.
It was a long time ago chronologically, but it wasn't that long ago in terms of episodes. But yeah, this is only his fourth film after Alien 3, 7, and The Game. The Game was a flop. We could cover that one day. That would be an interesting episode. 7 was a smash hit. Alien 3 made a little bit of money, but almost made Fincher want to leave the movie business, apparently.
Tough one.
Yeah, he really hated the process of making that movie. Fox. And he said part of the reason he made Panic Room was because Fight Club, we mentioned they built 70 sets. He said he was watching people load and unload trucks for 4 hours to film 2 lines of dialogue and he hated it. So he was like, the next one I do is going to be in one location and it's going to involve a lot less setup to get the shots done.
Interesting.
He's apparently quite a difficult guy to work for, though, in terms of like actors.
Yeah.
I think he made Jake Gyllenhaal do 200 takes of some scenes in Zodiac, and their relationship was not great after that. I think Michael Mann's similar. I think they're both kind of taskmasters on set.
Okay.
But can't argue with the results. He just made The Killer, which I think one of us brought to show and tell. I think we both saw it, though.
It was all right.
Very forgettable. It has not stuck with me at all.
I might have to watch it again to see if I can pick something up from it, but not my favorite Fincher.
I like Fassbender, but it almost felt, I don't know. I'll take it over Mank.
Yeah, I couldn't get through Mank. Maybe I have to go back to that one day too.
Yeah, I really love old Hollywood to enjoy Mank, I think.
Yeah.
I really did not like Mank, if you couldn't tell. But no news about his next movie. Apparently it will be with Netflix again. He's got at least 3 movies contracted with them, so he's done 2.
Cool.
So we'll get another one from him. I would like to see another Fincher movie in the theaters, though, before he hangs it up. Give me a theatrical release.
Let's try.
Written by Jim Mules. We mentioned him. He's only got 4 credits to this day. This was his first credit.
Amazing.
And then he made a TV movie called Semper Fi in 2001, something called Sweet Talk in 2004, and Jumper in 2008. You remember Jumper? With Hayden Christensen, I want to say.
Oh.
Was it Hayden Christensen?
For a second, I was going towards Looper, but no, Jumper, I didn't see it, but I can picture the concept in the commercials.
No, Looper fucking rips. I love that movie. Oh, yeah, Hayden Christensen. Directed by Doug Liman. That's interesting. I really like Doug Liman as a filmmaker. I even liked his Roadhouse.
Yeah.
It was just insane. And I like that about it. I love that Conor McGregor just like clearly does not know how to drive in it. And they never remark upon it.
Yeah.
But he never hits the brakes in any car he's in. He just drives till he crashes into something.
Fun little character choice. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, he's a terrible actor, but he's also like a foot shorter than Gyllenhaal. And I don't think Gyllenhaal's like a big guy.
No.
So it's pretty hilarious to watch them like square off.
That's an accomplishment to be a foot shorter than Gyllenhaal, probably.
Yeah. So I think this is our first Pitt, right?
Is it? We didn't have him in here before?
I think
Congrats
so.
to Brad Pitt for staying out of the blast zone.
Staying out of the zone. He's got plenty of bombs on his record. Don't get me wrong. Like we could talk about Pitt movies for months. But so.
Oh, no, we had him in True Romance.
Oh, very small part though.
Yeah. But memorable. Yeah. Funny as hell.
Yeah, that was one of his breakout roles, I'm pretty sure. And then he did, what the fuck was that? What was the movie? Legends of the Fall, I think came like the next year. And I think that was like when he was a leading man. I had to think hard about that one. But then I remembered I had to picture my sister's like childhood bedroom because she had a big Legends of the Fall poster on her door.
Nice.
Just Brad Pitt like in a beefcake shot. Like,
sure. Yeah, I remember
like
that
9?
soft focus imagery from that movie.
I don't think I've ever seen it. Did Robert Redford direct that one? He did Bridges in Madison County, maybe.
Oh, okay.
So Pitt, second bomb in a row after Meet Joe Black. So everything was not Irie. And
I wonder how many people are going to get that reference. We'll put the audio clip in to help people.
You're going to have to, so that people don't think I'm just being weird. Meet Joe Black is a very famous movie for all the wrong reasons. There's one scene where Brad Pitt gets hit by a bus like 10 times, I think. Like it hits him and throws him up in the air and then hits him again. It's hilarious because it's clearly like a doll or CGI.
Yeah, shocking. I remember being horrified in that moment.
And so, by the way, stay tuned for Meet Joe Black. We're going to have to talk about it one day because it's just a bizarre movie. And then he's in the hospital and this elderly Jamaican woman is on her deathbed, more or less, and she's scared. And since he is, spoiler alert, death in the movie,
yes,
essentially the Grim Reaper, he decides to comfort her in her native tongue.
Oh, yeah, because he's been around the world.
We get about 2 minutes of Brad Pitt speaking Pittois, and it is as bad as you imagine.
Fun stuff.
We'll put a little clip from it because it's the second time I brought up that line, and I don't want people to think I'm just being a weirdo.
No, be a sister, no devil, no dopey. I from that next place.
No, it's needs that little bit of explanation, but it's some fun Pitt memery.
So he followed this up with Snatch, which was more of a small role for him, but felt like he had a ton of fun doing it. And his character is one of the more, his scenes are some of the most quoted from Snatch. You like Dags? And then he did the Mexican after that, which I was so ready to cover the Mexican months ago. And I looked it up and it made too much money, which I was.
Oh, really?
I remember that being like, everyone just shit on that movie for a solid year. Everyone said Gandolfini was great in it. And that was the only redeeming quality.
Oh,
But
yeah, I never saw.
yeah, it's basically just Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, and James Gandolfini. And the titular Mexican is a gun, I believe.
Okay.
So I always used to get it confused with The Way of the Gun. It's better than The Way of the Gun, but
Okay.
it's not by much. He'd also star in Spy Game with Robert Redford. Maybe that's why I had Redford on the brain in
Sure.
2001, which was a huge bomb. I think it cost, let me get you the actual figures because we're going to have to talk about Spy Game one day. I did not realize that it was such a big bomb. Directed by Tony Scott.
Oh, okay.
RIP. $115 million budget, only made $140 million. That's damn near $100 million club territory.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that someday. We'll take a little break from Pitt. And I know you want to do Ad Astra, so we got to move that up the list.
Oh, yeah. We're juggling the bits now.
But that same year, he did Spy Game. He also did Ocean's 11. And I feel like that kind of kickstarted him into super A-list territory.
Yeah.
He was already a big movie star around this time, but his next movies were Troy, Ocean's 12, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And then he just was bankable. And
Yeah.
to some degree still is. He had his share of bombs along there. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford,
Right.
which we will have to talk about one day too. Jeez. Ad Astra, like we mentioned, By the Sea. But then he did stuff like Inglourious Bastards, Burn After Reading, Moneyball. Never won an Oscar.
Yeah.
Never even nominated for an acting Oscar. I don't know. Has he ever been nominated for an acting Oscar? Maybe for the assassination of Jesse James? Let me see. You know what he wasn't nominated for? World's Best Dad.
No,
Wow, wow.
but
Oh no, he won Best Supporter for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
okay.
Yeah. And he was nominated for Best Actor for Benjamin Button and Moneyball, but didn't win. And then
Okay.
he was nominated for 12 Monkeys all the way back in 96 for Best Supporting Actor. He's great in that movie.
Yeah, that was fun. I remember that being really cool. Yeah, so
Old
he's
Gilliam,
got everything: success, accolades, appreciation.
family that loves him. Oh, wait, not everything. It's in the news. His daughter just petitioned to have Pitt removed from her name.
Oh,
know
I see.
By Jolie, one of his children with Angelina Jolie.
I see.
Yeah, it's out there. Let's talk about Norton.
Yeah.
So
Norton.
This is not the last you'll hear about us and Ed Norton. He's got a share of stinkers on his resume too. But every actor who works as much as he does is going to have misses. He's widely considered one of our better actors. I think
Yeah.
that's been true since he debuted, essentially. Primal Fear was like his breakout role and everybody was like, holy shit, this kid is something special. But he's definitely developed a reputation for being kind of a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit more in-depth reading on this issue than I ever have when I was researching this episode. And it's interesting because there's plenty of stories out there about him being a pain, locking Tony Kaye out of the editing room for American History X and just doing it himself. But then Tony Kaye went on to say, I would help him. I would work with him again because he was right. And then Tony Kaye lost his mind, but that's not the point. Feuded with Brett Ratner on the set of Red Dragon, but also fucking Brett Ratner.
Yeah.
Yeah, have at it, man.
Whose side are you going to take?
If you put me in a room with either of those two, I'm siding with Norton. But then Ratner also helped him, I think, with some stuff with Motherless Brooklyn, like helping get it. So like he feuds with these people, but I do think it's from like a place of where he genuinely just wants to put out good stuff. And when he feels like
Interesting.
it's not going well, he's not afraid to assert himself. But if he's never been accused of like any kind of impropriety with like spousal abuse, like people say Ed Norton's an asshole, all they mean is he's a perfectionist at his job.
Okay.
There's really no chatter about him being a bad person out there. So
Well, that's good.
I do want
It's
to
reassuring.
draw a line that's different than when we say, I watched the scene of Jared Leto getting punched in the face a bunch of times. Like, we can all figure out what I'm trying to say, allegedly. But like Ed Norton just seems like a guy who really wants to only put out good movies. And when he feels like a project's not moving in the right direction, he will put his foot down.
Yeah.
Which probably sucks when you're a director working with, or like a studio executive working with him, but he wants to put out a good product. And I can certainly respect that. And then, of course, Helena Bonham Carter, she would just be Tim Burton's muse for many years.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I feel like she lost a lot of great years of her career starring in shit like Dark Shadows and Alice in Wonderland. I don't like most Tim Burton stuff that he's put out recently.
Yeah, I don't really either. I somehow never really jibed with his world.
I liked Edward Scissorhands as a kid. I liked the 89 Batman. I liked Batman, but like man's got one aesthetic. Although what was the movie? Big Fish, I think, is actually probably his best movie overall.
Really? Okay. I never tried to watch it.
Good movie, but not a big fan of Burton. But him and Bonham Carter did divorce in 2014, and she's staying busy. She was in Ocean's 8, which is a funny crossover with Pitt. Even though
Yeah.
he wasn't in it. It's a franchise he's very much associated with.
Sure.
And she's in the Enola Holmes movies, which are really popular.
Oh, right.
So she's working steadily, she's staying
Good.
busy. She was in The Lone Ranger. I completely forgot about that.
Oh, yeah. What do you know?
That wasn't a Tim Burton movie, but it felt like it should have been.
Yeah. Our catalog is so deep now, like we start losing track of people.
I know. I thought we never talked about Brad Pitt before because True Romance was a while ago.
Seriously.
So, Ian, do you want to hear what we're covering next?
I sure do.
This is one you might think we're trying to lighten the mood, but actually, I'd rather just watch Fight Club again than watch this movie. Evan Almighty.
Oh, Lordy.
Oh, boy. Was that pun intended?
Yes, pun attempted. Pun attempted.
Pun successful. But yeah, the sequel to Bruce Almighty, starring the Evan character from the first one, who had a grand total of 3 scenes. They decided to just make a movie out of him because Steve Carell became a big star in between.
That sounds like a really bad reason for a movie. A terrible setup.
Spoiler alert. It is.
Okay.
And it's a terrible fucking movie. Be prepared for just the angriest John you can imagine.
Oh, Lord. Okay.
We're talking like, yeah, we're going back to the That's My Boy territory with this one. I hate this fuck movie.
Okay.
It's not as morally repugnant as That's My Boy. It just sucks as a movie.
Oh, thank
And
God.
it's long. How long is Evan Almighty? It's way too fucking long. Let me look it up. Hold on. It's only 96 minutes long. Jesus, it felt like a fucking eternity.
It felt like hours and
But it cost
hours.
$175 million.
Okay, that's crazy. There'll be a lot to talk about. Stay tuned, folks. Don't be put off by the fact that the movie might suck because we have a lot of fun sometimes when that happens.
Honestly, I think the listeners prefer movies we hate based on the numbers. When we rip into a movie, it usually does better.
It's a cheap thrill of us getting nasty and talking shit.
And I like Steve Carell as an actor, so I take no joy in shitting on him, but I'm going to have to do it because I hate that movie. So thank you guys so much for listening. I'm going to do the whole spiel because it's been a while.
Do it.
Give us a rating. You can
Please.
rate us on Apple Podcasts. Leave a review. Really helps discoverability for the pod. You can leave just a rating on Spotify if you listen there. Hopefully 5 stars. We're going to send you a survey in the mail. Follow us on Twitter at BlastZonePod. Email me and Ian at BlastZonePod@gmail.com with any movie suggestions, feedback, questions for us. We've got a handful of questions in the bag. If we get a few more, we'll do another mailbag episode.
Cool.
Blast Me Anything, we called the first one.
That was fun.
Those are always a good time. And we'll see you next time in the Blast Zone.
See you next time in the Blast Zone.
Blast Zone.